Welcome to the All-Star Planning Podcast. My name is Kelsey, and this is the place where I talk all things teacher lesson plans. Today, we are talking about your standards. Lots of teachers have love-hate relationships with their standards, and I can tell you, I started out very much on the hate track. I hated my standards. I realized that I didn't really know how to read them, and that was where the beginnings of my trouble were. I did my student teaching in an excellent school, and I thought that all the teachers that were there were great teachers. Trust me, they are. But their methods didn't necessarily connect with the way that I wanted to teach and the teaching method that I was going to grow into. So when I started teaching on my own in my own classroom, I was the only chemistry teacher in the building. I didn't really have anybody to bounce ideas off of. So for me, I kind of just copied what I had learned at student teaching. It didn't work for me. I was so confused about why the things that I had learned in an excellent school from excellent teachers simply didn't work for my brain. I thought maybe I wasn't a good teacher. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. I was wrong. I'm a pretty good teacher. But I will say that your approach to your standards is absolutely everything. I originally was planning lessons based on the curriculum that I had learned during student teaching in the same sequence, in the same order. And one, that didn't work for me. Planning in their way didn't work for me. My school also had me working on a week-by-week method that also didn't work for me. My brain just couldn't wrap around all of these pieces, and I had almost no foresight to see what was coming next. So I would sit and I'd say, okay, my first unit of the year is supposed to be all about measurement, and I got through that one pretty okay. But when my second unit came around, called Matter and Energy, it's a big unit. 3.5, 4 weeks long. For me, I sat down and I would plan a lesson, and then I would go hunt through my standards to figure out which standards I was teaching. That didn't work. There were actually, in the standards that I use, there are more standards and skills than there are school days in a year. There are 189 distinct standards and skills in the curriculum that I teach right now, which meant that I was required to teach more than one a day most days, and in some days I was teaching 4 and 5 and then reteaching them throughout the unit, which is great. I do that now, and I have no faults with that. But the issue is that I was writing my lesson plans first and then going to my standards to try to find where the requirement was and what the code was. And because this unit was such a big unit, I found myself looking in lots of different places throughout my standards to find the things that I was actually teaching. And to be honest, I didn't know how to read my standards. No one ever taught me. We have standards, we have skills that are specific to chemistry, some that are just science specific, some that are interdisciplinary, and that was a huge issue for me. You have to know how to read your standards, and all standards are different. Sometimes you are looking at science specific standards or something that's specific to your subject, and then something that's a little bit more niche. Like for me, I'm looking at chemistry standards, and then even smaller than that, there are matter standards, there are energy standards, there are lots of different little subsections to your standards, and understanding them is step one. If you can't read the standards and understand how they're organized, what I suggest is that you organize them yourself. Put them in a way that makes sense to you. For me, what I did, around 5 or 6 months into my school year, when I finally figured out that this wasn't working for me, I thought it was just new teacher stress for a while, that I was just getting my feet wet and trying to figure things out. And then I realized that this simply doesn't work. This method doesn't work. So I literally took my standards and a pair of scissors and I chopped them up. Every single standard and every single skill was put into a different strip of paper, and then I organized them. And it made sense to me. I know, this sounds absolutely crazy, but this is the way that I did it, and I'm telling you, it works. When my periodic table and my bonding standards were all kind of scrambled in the original set that was given to teachers by the state, I was very confused by it. There seemed to be no organization. But the state had done an organization system at the end where they kind of organized everything by topic, but even then, those topics were too broad for me. and it simply didn't work. So by chopping them all up and organizing them myself, things became a lot more clear because I got to see it in my own format. I got to see it in a way that my brain could understand and comprehend. The thing that I loved about physically chopping them up with scissors is that I could put the little strips of paper in my hand and actually manipulate them on a tabletop. This was mind-blowing to me. I had no idea that this was even a possibility. I was just like, you know what? I don't know how to read these. I'm chopping them all up. It was one of those moments where you just realize that nothing else is working, so you get just really frustrated. I said, I'm just cutting them up. It was really like that. So for me, that's a method that worked. And then I looked at my standards in a new way. And this new lens is really what made planning much easier for me, was that instead of hating my standards and not knowing how to read them and not knowing where to look and planning my lessons first, I looked at my standards as my guide. Once I realized, and I don't know why it took me so long to realize this, but once I realized that my standards were my friends, my standards were my checklist of things that the kids needed to know by the end of the year, I looked at it like a checklist. If you have a big to-do list, you say, okay, I need to vacuum, I need to do the laundry, I need to go grocery shopping. You take those things and you kind of sequence them, right? And then you would take your task of going grocery shopping and then you break it down into a grocery list. And when you have to maybe vacuum, you say, okay, I want to vacuum the living room and the hallway and my bedroom. And you just kind of, segment that list. That's what I did with my standards. I took my big standards and said, this is the big checklist of things that I need to teach. And standards 1 through 30 are atomic theory. So I'm going to teach those in my atomic theory unit. And then I would break those down into lessons. And that just made sense. I don't know why. Nobody thought to teach me this in college. And I don't know why it took me 6 months to figure it out, but I did. And I don't want anybody feeling as stressed out about their standards as I did. Your standards are just a to-do list. It's just a to-do list. There's no reason for them to feel overwhelming. Now, I know there are some subjects that have very few standards, like 10. That can be frustrating because then you have a gigantic big old standard and you need to break it down into units. To my understanding, this happens quite a bit in English classes where you have like writing standards and then you have to practice writing throughout the year. But I still suggest that you chop them up and take them and segment them into smaller. You would take all of your standards and put them in one big group based on their topic. So all of your atomic theory standards or all of your writing standards or all of your addition standards or whatever they may be, and then break those into smaller pieces and call those your lessons. Standards down, not lessons up. I guess it's because in college, when I had to write lesson plans, I was writing them basically with no context, right? Your professor will tell you that you need to write a week's worth of lesson plans. And then they were going to look through them and your peers were going to edit them and you'd look at them at that scale. But you never had to, at least I never had to, look at them with a bigger lens. I had done a few unit plans, but even then the templates I was working with didn't necessarily match up to the templates that worked for my brain. So I didn't really know where I was going wrong. Plus, for me, I was doing most of my training, not with people wanting to be chemistry teachers, but instead with math and science teachers. So I had physics, biology, earth science, and then all math. And trying to teach the structure of an atom to somebody who wants to teach math is kind of difficult, where in real life, your students kind of have a little bit of background information when you're doing a lesson that you want to teach in November. You've been teaching the kid for 2 months already. So I found a lot of issues there with just my training and the things that I had learned during student teaching. They didn't necessarily align with where my brain was headed. And then also my school had me on a week-by-week planning method, which again did not give me any foresight into what was coming next and the things that I needed to look at. So that is my suggestion in terms of standards, is to make them your best friends. Think of them as a checklist, and if you're still having issues there, then chop them up, chunk them into your units, and decide in which order they need to be taught, and then take those to-dos and break them into smaller things like your lessons. So Thank you for listening. If you haven't already signed up for my masterclass, I'm so excited about it. It is all about my planning method. I have like a five-step method to the thing. Standards is where we start, so I wanted to start out the podcast talking about standards. But it is a free masterclass. You can find it at plan.kelseyreevy.com, or if you're watching this on YouTube, it is in the description box of the video. And I think that's it. That's all. Happy planning. Thanks for listening.